Marketer of the Day, episode 586. Dare to be seen using podcast guesting campaigns, win-win joint ventures, reputation management, and content marketing with Kansas City web designer Phil Singleton.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast. We're chatting with Phil Singleton, and Phil will single-handedly give you a ton of advice about your SEO and about what you need to do for your podcast marketing. And Phil is a web designer, he's an SEO expert, and he's an award-winning author. And he co-wrote a book called SEO for Growth, the ultimate guide for marketers, web designers, and entrepreneurs. And he has a WordPress SEO plugin that will show to use some nerdy terms, the schema content of your site. So for example, if you have a site that has star ratings, you can get those to appear in the Google search result. And Phil's latest startup venture is called Podcast Bookers, and that's a service that helps marketers and executives get booked on established podcasts as a way to develop authority and personal branding, to improve SEO, and most importantly, to generate new leads and sales. So, Phil, how the heck are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Super glad to have you. So you have a ton of stuff going on, just like how we all do. You have your SEO agency. I think you have a local Kansas City podcast in addition to what we're talking about. So with all the things going on, what has you the most pumped up these days? What's your focus?
I think for sure, getting actually the podcast guesting thing has been the most eye-opening, because it wasn't long ago, maybe a little bit over a year ago, I was one of these people out there that, thought of podcasts and maybe podcasting as almost kind of a fringe marketing tactic type of thing. And then all of a sudden, I got involved in it. I was like, holy cow, how it is. Once you get in, you see the light and stuff and how many people are using it, how mainstream it is. But really, how many, specifically the guesting, I've been doing digital marketing for 13 years now, and I've never done anything, I think, that provides as much bang for the buck as getting booked on established podcasts like I'm doing right now, right? Because it's like there's the ripple effect and the things that happen as a result of it. There's just not many things you can do out there in terms of digital marketing today that get as many benefits as getting on somebody else's show. I think most people think about, okay, this is great. Somebody's got great website and authority like yourself has a show. We get access to your audiences, which is a huge benefit, to be introduced as an expert to somebody who's built up an audience that trusts them. That's a great, and that's the one I think people think of mostly. But what ends up happening when you get guests on somebody else's show is the show's like about you, right? The guest that's on it. And one of the popular things that's happening for a while now in SEO has been, people always trying to work on backlinks. Backlinks are still really important. A very popular way to get quality backlinks around, because right now, in the old days, volume of link building was really good for your website in terms of getting rankings on Google. That's a bad thing now. We don't want to get a volume of low quality or unrelated links back to our website, but high quality backlinks still really help a lot. And that's when it ends up happening in terms of the guesting thing. You go out, you spend some time on somebody's show. It's about you, as in you. It's like today, it's about me, the guest expert, that's providing these types of benefits, and you're earning great high quality backlinks. Well, one of the ways that SEO agencies to this day get quality backlinks for their clients is by something called, blog outreach or guest blogging, right? Well, that's a tired, kind of a spammy, really hard thing to do, to go out. Let's say if you're a business owner or somebody, you're going to try and write 600 or 1,000 words of a blog post for somebody else's website. You got to go do the outreach. And then the only benefit that you really get out of that process is maybe you get a one backlink that's kind of organic, that's going to help to your overall SEO goals. Whereas if you're a guest on somebody else's show, it's about you, the personal branding. You're establishing yourself as an expert. You're very easily kind of earning quality backlinks to some of your web properties and social media sites, and it's a very natural, organic process where you get a lot more benefits versus this tired form of, guest blogging going out there, and it gets expensive. If you look at going to like a guest blogging or a link building agency to get a blog placement on a lot of them measure in terms of like Moz's domain authority, right? Which is a scale from 1 to 100 that basically measures the SEO power or the quality of a website. Well, it goes from 1 to 100. So if you're going to get a link and pay for a link building or a guest blogging agency in like the domain authority of like 20 to 30, which is established, but it's still lower than maybe like a CNN that might be a domain authority 80 or 90. Well, those 20 domain authority 20 or 30 links that you would pay somebody to get on, those might cost you $200, $300 just for that link, right? Well, if you do a guesting campaign, let's say you go out, now all of a sudden the show's about you, personal branding. The author usually is going to do like an episode page. You're going to earn some backlinks on it. You're going to get exposure to an audience. There's going to be cross media amplification where the hosts like you would share it in their social channels. The guests like me would go out and do my own amplification to my own channels when it gets launched. There's all sorts of these ripple effect benefits that go out that people don't think about. And those it's just a very valuable form of content marketing that has way more benefits than something that would be as one-dimensional, let's say, as just link building or doing guest posting or blogger outreach.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no kidding. I mean, you definitely get the best bang for your buck with this whole podcast guesting thing, because as you were explaining that, what was going on in my head was I was looking to like eliminate the possibilities, right? Because it's like, let's say that you have that local business or you have that website and you say, well, I want to get more traffic to my site. I want to get higher in the rankings. And you think, well, I could run Google ads or Facebook ads, but then that takes a while to figure out. I have to spend all this money and I have to spend all this time tweaking the ads, and maybe I'll hire a team to do it, but that's even more money. And then you say, all right, well, then let me then try ranking organically. And then you always hear about people who are cranking out the content and maybe they're posting on Facebook, but then, as you know, Facebook loves to ratchet down the amount of reach we all have. They love to show our posts and filter things and just show less and less. And then you always hear about people who are blogging all day or they're creating YouTube videos all day, and then you look on their channel and the videos say no views, maybe there's 2 views, and maybe those views are, maybe 1 view was them watching their own video and 1 view was Facebook verifying the video. So that seems not very good. And then, then you hear about guest blogging, where, and to be honest, like sometimes I'll get some of these cold emails coming in to me saying, oh, I see you have a blog, can I post an article about it? And I'm thinking, no, like why would I copy and paste something that you wrote? But then if someone says, hey, I see you have a podcast, let me jump on, I'm like, okay, yes, because now I know that you're actually serious, that it's going to be something completely unique, not a spun article, not something that's super spammy. And then from the point of view of the person looking to promote their website, I mean, way less time put in, right? Because you don't have to write this clever, well-formed article. You don't have to keep on following up with, say, like Inc. magazine or Forbes or Entrepreneur or something. You can just go to a podcast that's out there, get booked, show up, be personal, answer some questions, give your spiel, and then as far as those ranking factors, I mean, it's super great too, because like you said, instead of having to buy the spammy links, you get all these backlinks, and then there's the whole like dwell time factor. So if someone is looking for, let's say, Kansas City web designer, and then they end up on this exact episode and they sit on this page for 20 or 30 minutes listening to our episode, Google says, well, cool, that post, that podcast episode from Robert Plank, we're going to rank that highly. But not only that, but that has a link over to Phil's web design agency. So we're also going to increase that a little bit too, if I'm understanding their strategy correctly. So all this without having to put in a lot of money or a lot of time, you just get a booking agency like yourself to get scheduled on other podcasts and then just show up and give your shtick. Is that on the right track there?
Totally. And I'll take it a step further, because you really brought up some things that I didn't. But one of the secret hacks that I've gotten out of it that's really been worth the entire, almost kind of the entire effort's been, I'll go on the show. I'll really try and give my shows, and I'll really try and give my best effort with the hopes of impressing the host. And then what I do, and part of my process is I'll at the end of the episode, like you'll see, Robert, I'll actually send my review funnel to them to see if I can get a review based on how I was in terms of being a guest on a show, right? Well, then you can do this to direct in lots of different ways, right? In my case, I've used it to build up Google reviews. So when I started this, I had 70 or 80 reviews. Now my Google reviews are up over 130, right? That really helps you, especially if you're doing things locally or regionally. Those Google reviews can really help you in all sorts of different ways. Helps you organically, helps you show up in the maps locally, adds a lot more trust and credibility on the website. You can also then repurpose those reviews, right? The good ones you can cherry pick. You can put them on your website in terms of like static reviews, or repurpose them in other ways. We actually use it as part of the additional outreach process, right? So we'll go out, and as part of the process, we get guested. Then we tell our clients, hey, go out and make sure that you ask the host for a review. If you get a good review we could use later, then we'll actually use that review in part of the next outreach. Because it's great if you're a host, right, Robert, or like myself, my own guest. If somebody were to come on and pitch themselves, or have somebody else pitch them and say, hey, these 2 or 3 last hosts said they were an excellent guest. They were great at maybe promoting on social media. They brought lots of good tips to the audience. That actually helps you kind of almost snowball yourself into getting onto bigger and better shows later, right? So you get lots of extra like ripple of benefits if you I kind of credit this to the SEO thing, because I think it's, if you just look at like podcasting in general, or even podcast guesting in just kind of that one dimensional, I got great content and I launched it, or I got on a website, I got to be a guest on a show and an audience heard me. That's not enough. That's not enough to really get the full benefit on it. You have to almost kind of take a step back and say, in this whole process, how can I get more benefit for a little bit more work, or not extra work? And I think that's one of these things where if you take blogging, or you take podcasting or podcast guesting, take a step back and look at the whole process and see if you can hack your way into more benefits. That's how you can really like 10x it, right, instead of 1 or 2x it.
Yeah, and it sounds like there are lots of little tweaks that we can be adding onto our podcast guesting once we get rocking and rolling here. Like you said, the just following up a little bit to ask for reviews, or something else that happens every now and then is I'll have a podcast guest who, after we're done, says, well, you know what I'm going to do is I recorded the conversation from my end as well. I'm going to get it transcribed and I'll send you the transcript. And I think, geez, as a podcast host, that's amazing for a guest to say. And it's not like guests have to do that, but every now and then someone says that they do something like that. And that's super awesome, because, I mean, what does that cost them? $30 or $40 to get this extra in with me. And then people always talk about, things like joint ventures, and I don't know, like that always has a bad sort of name to it, right? You think of joint ventures, you think like an affiliate program or a launch, or we do like link swaps or something. But I mean, this podcast guesting thing, it's like joint ventures on crack, right? Because you now have this SEO ranking and all these pages, and that's not even counting the repurposing on social and all those, where you and this person are kind of linked together, right? So if you can have someone who's an up-and-comer in your industry, and from either way, right? If you have a podcast, you have a guest who's a rising star, or you're looking to get some traffic and you hop on just some of these podcasts on a regular basis, and then the podcast blows up, well, then that's something that's out there in search engine world forever, unless the podcast shuts down. Why would it ever? So now you have this kind of permanent joint venture, and then if you can just make the time a little bit every week, maybe show up on like one show a week, then that's just something that can just build and build just by budgeting a little bit of your time every week to take this seriously.
Exactly. 2 more things I'd like to mention. One is one of the things you mentioned, the transcript. One of the things I've done, I don't do it as much anymore because I have so much going on with my own podcast, but one of the very first shows I was on was called The WP Chick by Kim Doyle. And I actually I asked her if she was going to transcribe it. She said no. So I actually said, can I transcribe it at my own cost? And I did. Except in this case, I said, can I take that transcript and use it as a blog post on my website? right? So she had her episode nights. I was on her show. I asked her if I could transcribe her show that I was a guest on, and I made that and I transcribed it, put it on as a blog post on my website. Now that post from her show, if you type in SEO podcasting benefits or podcasting benefits of SEO, my blog post comes up number one globally, based on the transcript from her show, right? So she got links back and benefited, and then I was able to repurpose something that she wasn't even going to use, right? So that's just another thing that it's out there. Some people, like you said, they're not going to transcribe. Maybe they go through the effort of writing their own episode show notes, which is great. That's even better. But if you're not going to use if you see somebody's not going to use those transcripts, you could actually have your own content and repurpose them on your own website in a way you could turn into a blog post and then give some additional benefit to the person that had you on their show. So you mentioned that. I just want to give you one practical thing that actually, it does work. I've actually done it, and I've got some ranking on a fairly competitive, niche type of term. Another thing I was going to mention that kind of gets back to the reviews is if you have a client or if you want to kind of hedge potential review problems later, what's really interesting about being on a guesting campaign is, again, because it's about you, a lot of times your name is going to come up quite a bit. Sometimes it's actually in the episode title or the episode notes, or even in the URL. Where this gets really interesting for reputation management is I've had clients, in fact, I have one right now, and I've had plenty that have come to us in the past, that are trying to figure out ways to push down content, right, on maybe an article or something that was written about them in the past. Well, people that have their own podcast are already advanced content marketers like you, Robert. You know what's going on, but you've already been doing this. People that have podcasts, they have websites that tend to have more SEO equity and more value, more trust, more credibility because they've got established podcasts. A lot of it has to do with dwell time. A lot of it just has to be with good content marketers. Well, if you get an episode on a show on yourself, and you've been on many of them, there's a good chance that when somebody Googles your name, that some of these episodes, if you do enough of them, are going to start to kind of fill up the results, and you're going to start stacking, the search results on episodes that you've been on. So that helps you, again, with personal branding and authority. People will see that, I think this guy's been interviewed on a lot of different things, but it can also help counter, a reputation management issue where people are trying to get maybe older articles and somebody's gotten unfairly treated maybe in the local media or something like that. You can actually use the strength of some of these podcast websites to end up getting good, new, relevant content out there and push some of that old stuff where you might have had some reputation management issues in the past.
Yeah, and that's awesome because you mentioned that in this sort of scenario, it might be that maybe someone's company got a bad review, or for whatever reason their name is just trashed publicly in the media.
Sometimes it's just one. Yeah, sometimes it's just one article too. They're trying to have an issue with.
Yeah, just one article, and then it gets syndicated in multiple places. Like I have one of my wife's cousin or something, some sort of distant relative. He crashed years ago. He crashed his car into someone's house, and I don't even think he was even under the influence. Just crashed his car, but then front page of the newspaper, and then you Google his name, and guess what you find? He crashed his car into someone's house, and luckily he has somewhat of a common first name, and he's not an internet marketer, so it's not that big a deal to him. But if it was in that scenario, like you said, it might be something that happened a few years ago. And what's really great about what I'm hearing from you there is that, well, let's say the bad thing happened a few years ago. You're going around and guesting on all these podcasts, and that's more recent content. So if I'm understanding search engine optimization and Google's strategy and everything correctly, they tend to rank the newer stuff higher, right? Like if something is 5 years out of date, they might tend to rank that less than something that's brand new. So this bad thing happened, or your name got in the media, or even someone with a similar name as you did something, and then you want to sort of bury those search results. It's easier to bury with the more recent stuff, the new content you're generating, which is the podcast guesting. Is that right?
Exactly. And I think it actually works in some ways too, almost kind of preemptively, right? Because you never know if you're going to run into that one client or that one thing or that one misunderstanding. Might be on a website, might be somewhere else, might be a news article or something else. So there's that where you're stacking the almost to hedge yourself against future stuff. But certainly for things that are old, I think this is one of the best ways, because everybody's looking out there to get some stuff out there. And I guess if you push out a guest blog post, or it's just hard to get that kind of content pushed out in a way where you can actually get it ranked. Where I think I found it to be a lot easier, especially when it's coming in and around somebody's name, because again, I think it has a lot to do with the way the content's presented. Where if you're in a news article, your name might be mentioned once or twice in it. But again, if you're on a podcast episode and somebody says we're transcribing or writing about you, your name's in there multiple times. If you're in the transcript, there's a lot more content. And yes, it's newer and fresher, like you said, a lot better chance to actually get up there and start pushing some of that stuff down.
Yeah, and even like you mentioned about how the host of that podcast is probably doing all kinds of things to market their podcast. So in a lot of ways, they're doing the marketing for you, right? You show up on their show one time, and then they might have all the episodes repeating out on a buffer, on a Twitter campaign. They might be doing promoted posts, and even if they aren't doing a lot to promote your episode together, if they're advertising for their own site, then that raises up everything else right there. And yeah, you're making me think of maybe 10 years ago, I had someone who came to me and claimed that he was a customer of mine and wasn't, and said, give me this plugin I bought, give me this stuff. And I was like, I'm sorry, like, I've never heard of you. I don't have any record of you. And he was insisting, and I think he must have like pirated my stuff and then thought that he was a customer, and then he posted a really like nasty blog post and had all the stuff, and I went and left a comment, but he didn't approve it. But I didn't really lose any sleep over it, because his blog post was like ranked on page 5 because I had all this other, I had the YouTube videos, I had the blog post, now I have the podcast, and he was just some random blip in the radar, and I didn't think much of it. So yeah, I love your strategy, your thoughts there on doing it preemptively. And then circling back a little bit to just that topic of the little tiny touches of what people can do, like how you got the transcript made and then made that on your own site as a blog post. I've even had people who have been a guest on my show, and then sometimes they will repost the episode on their blog. So for example, some of these podcast players, including the one I use, has an embed link, sort of like how YouTube does, so people can grab the code and then put it on their site. And as you know, sometimes people who have their podcast episodes will put the episode on YouTube or on SoundCloud. So that's another easy task, another good reminder for those of us who are guesting on podcast shows to maybe look for ways that we can like tweet about it or blog about it, or if there's that capability to embed the video or the audio recording on our own site, to make sure to just do our part and have that kind of like media appearance. So you have this kind of podcast guest booking agency called Podcast Bookers. And so who is it for? Like, if someone comes to you, are there certain types of marketers, business owners that should be on podcasts, or others that shouldn't be?
I think we basically kind of started it for almost the professional digital marketers that would kind of get the piece of it. I know we're getting more folks that are like, I don't think the SEO community is even really fully kind of come on board to see what the value is. I do see more SEO people, and we do have some clients that are coming on board for it. But we originally started out almost for business folks and people that were maybe digital marketers and agency owners. But we are starting to get people, we've got people in sports that have come to us. The only ones that we really don't think we could probably do a good job for are like politicians. We've had a couple come that were just like, it's just a little tough to get them booked on shows, because that's one of those deals where it really narrows your focus unless you've got something else to talk about that's not so polarizing, I guess. But I would say most of our book's going to be folks that are in or around digital marketing, but we can definitely, because there's so many podcasts out there right now, right? If you've got a professional way to package somebody up and make sure that you can deliver an outreach on behalf of your client, where you can show pretty quickly to the host that there's a way to add value to their audience and not just do some random, kind of like spamming type stuff, and that makes a really big difference. But yeah, it's mostly, I set it up because I've had so much success with it over the last year or so. I was like, I got to find a way to bundle this up and resell it for my clients, because part of what our big hack is now for the way we deliver services is do a website, do the keyword research, create a content strategy, We do blogging for people, but we do them in series of like 10 to 15 posts. We wrap those up into an ebook for download on the website. Then we use that same book that we created, that blog series, turn people into authors on Amazon, right? They get an Amazon link on their author page and that kind of stuff. But once we've got that authorship and make them an author somewhere, then we've got something we think that's more promotable, like for a guesting strategy. So we can create a one sheet. We made this client now an author, and this kind of builds up some of their expertise and authority and branding in a way that we could present them to people to be an authority in their niche. And then that rolls into a guesting campaign. And for us, it's great because if you start getting your client guest once a month or twice a month or 4 times a month on a guesting campaign, they're almost kind of doing some of our homework for us, right? Because they're out there, they're doing their own content marketing, they're getting messaging out there, actually doing their own link building. In some cases, they're doing their own online reputation, brand management with the reviews, and kind of doing that preemptive stuff that we're talking about. So that's kind of how our package rolled. That's the reason why I think we went after like business owners and digital marketers, because I was like, this is how well it's worked for me. How can I bundle this up, kind of work it into our program, and then have this kind of a sequence thing where, again, it's kind of a seamless thing that already kind of works in, which what I think is almost kind of just almost like a smart personal branding authority content marketing campaign.
Yeah, I mean, it works so well for you that you want to put it to work for others. And the way that you just laid out that sequence, it sounds like podcast guesting is the next logical step. Like you said, you make the website, do the keyword research, you generate the content, make the blog post, the ebook, then that leads to the Amazon book. But then at that point, you're like, well, I've set all these things up. Now it's time to get some eyeballs on this thing. And then, like we said earlier, instead of fighting the uphill battle like with paid ads or with guest posting, instead you have that marketable book, you make the one sheet, you go and do that guesting campaign, and that way you just put in a little bit of time every week and then show up on these shows. And so as far as the podcast guesting thing, it seems to me, and like I need to up my game with the podcast guesting. I only appear on probably one podcast a month. I'd like it to be more like once or twice a week, but it seems like sometimes I'll like kind of like stalk or follow people who I see are on a lot of podcast shows, and it seems like there's not a lot of sort of like gotcha questions, right? There's always like, if the topic is like SEO or publishing a book, it's always like sort of the same kind of stock questions. And so it seems like it's easy to figure out your sound bites, right? And it's easy to, on the one sheet, give that host those sample questions. So it seems like by just appearing on even just a handful of podcast shows, you can figure out just exactly what the predictable 4 to 6 questions end up being. And so there's that part of it. And then it also seems like you also stay a little bit in touch with the cutting edge. And what I mean by that is I was on a podcast a couple of months ago talking about membership sites, and then I was answering kind of the usual questions, and then he threw out something about asking about this new thing that we all have to deal with called GDPR. And then I was thinking, oh, I'd never thought to incorporate this new hot trend of the GDPR compliance with membership sites. So it seems like there's kind of both those two things in there. Like you figure out your message really well, but then you also get the little blips on the radar of what is up and coming, right?
Exactly. I mean, it keeps you fresh, keeps you on your feet. But I think the one thing is like, you also kind of always in the back of your mind, it's like, look, you're not going on somebody's show to make it be an advertisement, right? So the onus is on you to really deliver the stuff. I think you as the guest to really try and bring what you can to impress the audience. I mean, you're there, you get this one chance. And I in the beginning, I think when I got on shows, I didn't really appreciate how special it is to be on a show like yours, Robert, where the people that are listening, and it doesn't matter if there's 500 or 50,000, whatever it is, there's a group of people that have listened to you that really trust you, because of what you bring to the thing. So for you to come on as a guest and get on somebody's show, the onus really is on you as a guest to not be an advertisement, not pitch yourself, because you're going to get that is part of sharing and educating, right? It's like it's selling by teaching, right? You're saying, here's all the stuff, here's my best tricks, yes, of course you can go do some of this yourself. If you're not, you could hire somebody, like me, or learn some more stuff of it later. But the whole idea is you're kind of giving up, some of your best hacks that are working to this day. And so the onus is, I think, always on the guest to always try and bring the best ideas. And for me, in my case, I'm always trying to I'm not a really good salesperson in terms of selling other people's stuff. I only sell what's working for me. So that's how I stay fresh on it, right? I'm just saying, hey, this stuff's working for me. I know it works. Here's what but if you're a guest on somebody else's show, you should always be bringing, some of your best hacks and not worry about sharing your best ideas, because that's what really is going to get you the most out of it, really. Because, when people say you're sharing and you're educating, then that's how it's going to work the best. And it keeps you on top of your game, because, every show that you're on, the stuff that I was talking about at the beginning last year, I wasn't talking about guesting as much because I hadn't really seen the whole thing. I hadn't started, the company like I have right now. So it's kind of changed that way. But as you said, Robert, new stuff comes up, we have to adapt, and then we adjust and see what works and then share.
Yeah, and that whole mindset you have there of sharing your best stuff, it sounds like it really takes a lot of the pressure off, because, as you know, like, podcasting is definitely not a webinar, right? You do a webinar, you're thinking, well, either I'll script it or I'll say, let me put this in there and let me introduce this part. But with a podcast like we're on, there's just the conversation, or there's the pre-planned questions and some answers, but it's really kind of low-key soft selling. And and two things about that. One is that you mentioned like how that podcast audience is so dedicated, and you hear about, there's some statistic of like 80% or something of your podcast audience will listen to every single minute of every single episode out there. And it's like, when does that ever happen with a YouTube channel or a blog post? Never. So there's that part of it, is that there's that subsection of the audience that's super dedicated. And then there's also the aspect of, I had a guest on a couple months ago who did a lot of guesting, and she treated it sort of like a personal branding. And her analogy was like the TV show creator Shonda Rhimes, right? She does like Grey's Anatomy and Scandal and all those silly shows. And so this podcast guest was saying, well, it's a lot like Shonda Rhimes kind of branding. Like, if there's a Shonda Rhimes show, you're like, okay, I know what I'm going to get, right? It's like, I might be watching a new show, but it's still this person's branding. And so this person's attitude was, it doesn't matter so much what the offer is, what the book is, what the website is. I can plug that, I can drop that. But what's most important is I'm building up my own name. And then whatever, if someone likes me as a person, or they like some of the value I have, then they'll go to whatever that latest project of mine is that I'm plugging. And as you said, that changes all the time. So it sounds like, we don't necessarily have to have all of our ducks in a row. We don't have to have the slickest landing page or this really fancy funnel. Just start showing up on some podcasts and start promoting your stuff, and most importantly, sharing some value, right?
Exactly. And I think you probably, what I learned, what I do, and I don't know if you do some of this now yourself, but when I have people like on my own show right now, half of it is for me as the host to get like some free consulting. So I see somebody that's doing something right that I like, I want to come on and pick their brain. Half of it's probably a lot of times it's probably for the host to try and learn some stuff, right? So you definitely want to bring it for that reason, because they want to bring stuff to their audience, but they're also probably looking for some of their own benefit too, as a way to stay on top of things, right? And I didn't really see that full part of it until I saw some of my own motives for having my own show. And I'm going to wrap that piece of it up. Was the one thing that I wish I would have done earlier was, if I had a guesting campaign, I should have had my own show earlier. And why is that? It's because every show that I've been on, there's a high probability that at least some of the folks on there I made a connection with and liked what I had to say and would have subscribed to my show had I had a podcast for them to subscribe to, right? So I went over, I probably did 60 or 70 podcasts without ever having my own podcast. Well, now I have one called Local Business Leaders, right? So somebody that likes what I say, well, they're already, the one good thing about doing podcast guesting is they're already podcast consumers, right? They love podcasts. So if you say something and you have this thing, you actually have, that kind of completes the circle, I think, of the content part. Whereas if you want to get out there and leverage other people's audience and get all these great benefits you get as a guesting campaign, but you don't want to lose the opportunity to pick up subscribers on people that might like what you have to say. Because if I had my own podcast, that first 60 in, I might have picked up dozens, scores hundreds of subscribers that I didn't have the opportunity to get because I just didn't have a show. I think that really completes the full circle of it. For folks that are like trying to dip their feet into podcasting in general, I think guesting is a great way to kind of get involved and understand how it works, because you don't have to put the effort into like producing the show. But the natural fit to this whole thing is to really, I think, have a guesting campaign and have your own show, and then you really get the full benefit of the whole program.
Fantastic. Well, like you said, sometimes with these interviews, we ourselves as the hosts pick up a lot of ideas. That I'm getting a ton of them. And, as we're winding down our conversation here, when you're explaining that whole concept of it's a nice to have your own podcasts when you also appear on other podcasts, you're reminding me of one of my favorite marketers is Armin Morin. And what he would do is when he would go to a seminar, to a conference, and present on stage, he'd make sure that part of his offer, if not the whole offer, was another seminar, another conference, right? Just because if someone was in attendance at the seminar, then they've proven themselves to be someone who likes to attend seminars, so why not sell them more of what they're already a part of? Just like with this, if you're listening to a podcast, then you're more likely to go and subscribe to another podcast. And then so the second thing that it makes me think of is I had a podcaster, John Lee Dumas, on the show a couple of weeks ago, and it blew my mind, and it was so simple though, but he kind of explained this idea of build up your own asset, build up your own traffic and your own list and your own podcast. That way, when you're looking to get on someone else's podcast, that person will sort of in the back of their mind be like, well, I better let this person on my podcast because I also want to be on their podcast. So build up your own stuff so that way you'll look a little more enticing, a little more appealing. And then as far as that aspect that you mentioned there of having a guest on and picking up lots of little nuggets and learning from your guest itself. Like I know that you're friends with One Click Lindsay, and that's actually the reason why I reached out to you and had you back on the show, because she reminded me of you. And I had her on the show earlier today, and she's promoting a book, but then I was also asking her about like a recent launch she did, because I kind of wanted to know what was going on there. And she does a local podcast like you do. And so I was just getting a little bit of that free coaching. So, once again, this whole podcast guest thing, it seems like it's a win-win for all of us in all these different ways. So if people say, all right, fine, you guys, Phil and Robert, you guys can shut up now. I'm totally sold on this podcast guesting idea. Where should they go, and what do they need to know about jumping off on this podcast guesting journey with you?
I think there's a couple things. One is we do this kind of stuff, and you hope that you spread information out. You sell by teaching, all this kind of stuff, and eventually clients will come to you. But I'm really a big proponent of, please, like I did my own outreach in the beginning until I realized, hey, in my case, I run an agency. It's not worth my time to go do the outreach and stuff on it. But certainly people can do some of this on their own stuff. In fact, if you want to come to the website and ask us, we've got it's about an 87-minute video where I go through and say, hey, if you're going to do a guesting program, make sure you do these 10 things so that you can get way more benefit and SEO and reviews out of it and do that. If you come that, I'm happy to give that to you on podcastbookers.com. And it's one of these things that we actually give to people after they buy. And it's a little training thing that we do before we start doing the outreach for them. But I think a lot of people that are do-it-yourselfers should do a little bit of their own research and a little own outreach in the beginning, just to hone their pitch and to know and to be able to work with, say, a booker later, so they can work together and kind of figure out what that formula is to really, be able to get a streamlined thing. So podcastbookers.com is a great place to go if you want to hire somebody to help you do it. But I would start. It's one of these things where you can do it yourself. You don't have to hire somebody, especially in the beginning, especially if you're trying to bootstrap or get your feet wet. So I highly encourage people to really try it on their own first, especially if they're trying to build their business. SEO for Growth is a book that we did, SEOforgrowth.com. That's the one I wrote with John. Check that out. A lot of the stuff that we put in there is in that book. So I did one of the same things that I did right now. We put everything in the book. People will come to us in my office and they'll say, okay, it sounds great, Phil. We want to hire you. We give them the quote. too high for a lot of businesses, then we give them the book and say, everything that we do for your business is literally in this book. You can do it all yourself, or you can hire for us. I think we can probably do it, better, cheaper, faster than people. But there's a lot of things you can do in the book. So please read it, because it's like one of those deals. Like, just lay it out on the table, right? Some of these things that you do for folks, this is what kind of my whole approach to marketing now. Just tell everybody everything that you do, lay it out. Most people don't have the time to do it, on their own. So we just basically become literally an open book in that case. So SEO for Growth is a place to check that out. And check out kcwebdesigner.com. That's like still what pays the bills for me to this day. I didn't build my first website. I got a D in computer science in college and didn't build my first website till I was 35. So I'm literally the poster boy for if he can do it, anybody can do it, especially when it comes to digital marketing. But, check out some of the stuff that I've done on the site there, because, again, if you're trying to do better on your website or trying to get into this business, I got a pretty good formula laid out on that site and how we attract and close people. It's kind of all on there. So whether or not you like the design, it's a good kind of little case study to look at.
Fantastic. So to recap those URLs, that's podcastbookers.com if you're interested at all in getting more traffic, getting better rankings, which you should be, and you guest on some of these different podcasts. The book is SEOforgrowth.com, and then the web design agency is kcwebdesigner.com. And that was a great little nugget there, Phil, at the end about having that abundance mindset and just laying it all out on the table and then sharing your system, because that way the people that can't afford you, they'll get something out of it because they'll be able to use it themselves. With the people who can afford you but they just are short on time, they'll see what it is that you do, or maybe they've even tried it themselves a little bit and said, okay, I've done a little bit, I've been bit by the podcast guesting bug, I've tried it the hard way, now I've gotten some results from it, but I want to really turn up the juice on this. I want to push the easy button. I want someone else to do it for me. So that's a really nice path to getting some new customers. And so did I hear you right that, so if people go, or when people go to podcastbookers.com, if they want that 87-minute video about the 10 things that you do for the guesting, is that available, or do they have to contact you for that?
You'd have to actually so we've got two places on the website. One's an application because we basically kind of have to get an application to make sure that we can place folks. Don't go there. There's another just regular contact page. If you go into the contact page and say, Phil, I heard you on Robert's podcast, please send us access to the training video, we'll send it, because it's not public anywhere. We've got it kind of locked away in a place where we can send you a link, give you a password to it. But it's the whole process is really kind of in there. And I'd be happy to share that with your audience if they contact us. And we don't do any, it's not like you're going to enter a funnel and get drip fed a bunch of stuff. That's literally me just sending it. Or I could actually even give it to you, Robert. If you're happy to give you kind of the link to it. You can distribute it as you want, just as long as you don't post that part of it up on your website. We could do it either way.
I mean, I think we'll make them earn it, right? That the least that people could do is to raise their hand a little bit, because, I mean, as you know, Phil, it's easy to lurk on the internet. I mean, how many of us have read a blog post, listened to a podcast, and never left a comment, never reached out to the host or the guest? So yeah, I think that people can and should go to podcastbookers.com. And if you're interested in just jumping in, then fill in that application. But if you want to know the hard way, right? If you want to know the long division method and you're not quite yet ready for the calculator, then click on that contact page and say, hey, Phil, I heard you on Robert Plank's show, Marketer of the Day, and I want that 87-minute video on the 10 things I need to do to get booked on podcasts. Pretty please, can I have it? I think that's the least you can do. You just say, contact Phil, you ask for that, he'll give it to you, and that's the beginnings of a real nice conversation. And then now you have those lines of communication open, right? If you can then ask Phil things about this pricing or about what he does or about your specific situation, well, then now you've got that dialogue started. So yeah, I think people can definitely go to podcastbookers.com, go to the contact page, ask for that, and we'll see you there. And I wish everyone listening to this show the best of luck on their podcast journey. I think they'll get a lot of traffic from showing up on these shows. As you said, Phil, this is the future. A lot of even SEO people have not caught on to this yet, and people need to be jumping on this before before, I don't think it'll get too crowded, but time is of the essence, right? We'll all run out of time. You took until age 35 to make your first website. Imagine if you did that when you were 25 or 15, and some people out there just need to be jumping on this stuff sooner rather than later. So podcastbookers.com is the place to go, and we'll see everyone there. And thanks so much, Phil, for stopping by and dropping a bunch of knowledge on us.
Thanks a ton.
This is Robert Plank, and would you like to be a guest on the program? Do you have an idea for a future episode, or do you just want to tell us how we're doing? Get in touch with us right now at marketeroftheday.com/ask to let us know.